Good morning. This is NPR News. I'm Brian Bakst. We're about 2 weeks from primary day, Tuesday, August 11th. Lots on the line, but we'll focus today on the U.S. Senate race for the DFL party's spot on the November ballot. We have the two leading contenders with us in studio today. They're Angie Craig, a four-term U.S. House member. Welcome. And Peggy Flanagan, a former state legislator and for the past 7+ years, Minnesota's lieutenant governor. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get started, I want to note for our listeners that we hope to have a similar debate among Republican candidates, but they didn't take us up on the invitation. So for you two, there aren't a lot of ground rules to go over. We're asking that you be as succinct as possible so we can get to as many topics as possible. Here's the one critical rule, though. Don't talk over each other because the radio listeners will have trouble hearing what you're trying to say. So, also for the radio audience, you can watch this debate at nprnews.org. It's streaming live now, or you can catch up with it later if you missed anything. All set?
All set. Ready.
All right. The issue portfolio you'd confront in the U.S. Senate is pretty vast, sometimes unpredictable. I want to start with a topic that's increasingly on a lot of voters' minds, and that's artificial intelligence. The Trump administration has staked out a largely deregulatory posture toward AI models under development, encouraging voluntary participation in reviews for risk, whether that's in the military, the banking sector, or other facets of society. Peggy Flanagan, is that the right approach?
I mean, I think we have to be incredibly cautious when it comes to artificial intelligence and AI. Just last week, we saw that OpenAI, its program essentially jumped into another system as it was trying to find the right answers for a quiz. I think we have to, proceed with extreme caution. I'm also really worried about what this means for, the workforce. If we see AI taking individuals' jobs away, I think it's important that those corporations then have to pay a price for it, either through, taxes or other means. What I'd also say is I think that this is, it's pretty dangerous. We have to be able to keep up with technology, but my worry is that the technology is going to exceed the guardrails that we have in place right now. We have to ensure that there are additional ones in place.
Representative Craig, hands on, hands off. Which is the right way?
I think we have to take an aggressive approach to regulating AI. Look, the output of AI is going to have massive changes, not only on our workforce, and I think this is one of the biggest issues, is we have to take an active role in making sure that this is not a job killer for Americans. And look, I led a workforce of 16,000 employees for a local company before I ever ran for Congress. And during that time, we were very aggressive in figuring out what jobs exist in the local community. So I think this is an opportunity to engage at the federal level. What I would say, though, is that jumping out of that sandbox last week, OpenAI, Brian, is incredibly dangerous. And I do think we have to consider a kill switch. And the other side of this is just the data centers. I think we actually have to federally regulate. No big tech company gets out of not funding the electricity cost, and the water quality and water supply in this country is another concern of mine.
Kill switch and federal data center regulation sound good to you?
I mean, I think that this is, an existential threat to us if it gets out of control. I think that's something that's important. When it comes to data centers, I think it's clear that people have big concerns all across Minnesota and all across this country. It absolutely is troubling to me that we seem to be moving at the speed of corporate interests and not of community. And we have to determine who benefits. Right now, it's these large, corporate interests who are benefiting. At the same time, we see the environmental impact potentially for folks' water supply and the energy costs going up.
Briefly, on balance, is AI a net plus or a net minus?
I think that's yet to be seen. But right now, I'm deeply troubled by it, especially when we see AI being used to manipulate people. Even just in this race, right? There was an ad that was aired that was an AI version of me. I think that's something that, Minnesota legislators took a stand on. There was a small window that allowed for it. But ultimately, this can put people at great risk. And I think it also increases distrust in systems and in government.
Angie Craig.
I was very clear that any AI usage should be watermarked. People ought to know if AI is being used. I think at the federal level, we ought to legislate that. Net, I think it's going to be full of enormous potential. I think about what Mayo Clinic is doing in terms of mining healthcare data to come up with how do we treat disease in this country. And I think that this is something that the federal government cannot let get out the barn door and stand on the sidelines. We've got to be very aggressive here.
Similarly, prediction markets have seen explosive growth, and many people wager on just about everything. Federal government has sued states, including Minnesota, for trying to clamp down on these markets. Representative Craig, you sit on the committee that oversees the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. What do you want to see done?
Well, we were just in a hearing last week on prediction markets as it relates to the gaming industry, and we were proud to have the Indian Gaming Association represented at that hearing. Look, I think the prediction markets are out of control. We need to put more guardrails on them. The problem is that this Trump administration has only named one commissioner to the CFTC. Certainly my committee, as ranking member of the top Democrat, has authority over this. And Mr. Seelig is running that agency from a regulatory perspective all by himself. We need a bipartisan commissioners. We need the cops on the beat at the CFTC. And we certainly need to ban insider trading and many of the activities going on prediction markets
Peggy
today.
Flanagan, how would you approach them?
Well, I'd say a couple things here. I think it's clear that Minnesotans don't support prediction markets. Clearly, we banned this past legislative session. They are attacking us for it. They've taken us to court. But I think that this is one of the places where there's some pretty significant contrast between myself and Congresswoman Craig. The founders of Kelshi have contributed to her campaign. They have their preferred candidate in this race. And while she just talked about the head of the Indian Gaming Association coming and testifying, ultimately what these prediction markets, Polymarket, Kelshi, and others would like to do is to undermine Indian gaming overall. I think that's great risk, not just for Indian country and for tribes as a whole, but for Minnesota, for local economies as well. These enterprises are important, they're significant, and predictive markets have their candidate in this race, and it's Congresswoman Angie Craig.
Representative Craig, you want to respond to that?
Well, I would completely reject that. I also have the support of many tribal leaders from the state of Minnesota who have supported my Senate campaign as well, because they believe that I am the strongest Democrat to hold this seat against what appears to be Michelle Tafoya. I believe we should strongly regulate these prediction markets, and the CFTC has been cut by 15% under the Trump administration. It has been defunded, and I don't believe that the CFTC is prepared to regulate right now these prediction markets in the way that they should be. And I'm going to be fighting for that. And I think, that just illustrates, once again, the hypocrisy that continues to come from the lieutenant governor on campaign finance funding when, of course,
I'm
she's
sure
been
we'll
a
get into that a
hypocrite.
lot today. But before we move on, just a quick yes or no. Because it's already come up in Minnesota politics, I need to ask, have you ever placed a prediction market bet or even visited one of these platforms?
No, I have never placed a prediction market bet. But, of course, in my role as the head of the committee, it would be not appropriate if I hadn't actually looked to see what's happening on these. What's happening on these, in many cases, as it relates to politics, gaming, it needs to be stopped.
Prediction market bet on anything?
I have never bet on anything.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Well, because this is a 6-year term that you're after, there are projections out there that the Social Security Trust Fund is scheduled to run dry in 2032, smack dab toward the tail end of this term. That could lead to consequences that trustees say could include a significant and immediate cut to old age and survivor benefits. What will you do to shore up that fund, and how will you convince Republicans to work with you on that solution?
Well, I think, what has been really troubling to me is as I've been traveling across the state and hearing directly from folks who are, my age and younger, so often people say, well, Social Security isn't going to be there for me. And I think not with that attitude, it's not going to be. We have to be very clear. This is something that people have earned, that they've paid into. I don't think we should be taxing Social Security, and I think it's time that we pass the Social Security Expansion Act to make sure that this is available for folks into the future. It should not be privatized, and we certainly are in a place where people are struggling. They worry about how they're going to pay their rent.
But how do you plug that gap?
I think you plug that gap by passing this act and making sure that this is, solvent into the future is incredibly important. Social Security is not just for seniors. It's also for people who need it for Social Security disability. My mom utilized that program, and it was incredibly important for her. I think we've got an opportunity to work with Republicans, but we also have to make sure that people are very clear about what this means for them, sharing those stories and building strong support outside the Capitol to get this done. And I think we can get there.
Congresswoman Craig, is there a solution that you favor?
Well, I'm certainly already a co-sponsor of the Social Security Expansion Act, but I've actually written my own bill to help us extend the life of Social Security. My bill that I introduced 3 years ago would extend the life of Social Security for 34 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. It would also allow today's current seniors who are facing such a stress and strain on cost to stop paying federal taxes on their Social Security income. And the CBO has actually scored my bill as over the course of several decades, saving the federal government $9 trillion. So not only do I support, my grandmother's still with me. I'm very lucky. She's 99 years old, and she lives on that Social Security check. And so it's a very personal issue to me.
Would you support either a higher retirement age or higher payroll taxes to feed the fund?
No, we've got to eliminate the cap. We've got to make people who are fortunate enough to make over $186,000 continue to pay into Social Security. I don't think a lot of people realize that the wealthy in this country, the wealth gap in this country is killing us, and people know that, but I don't think people realize that if you're lucky enough to make $1 million a year, you stop paying into Social Security on the first $186,000.
Lieutenant Governor, do you support either a higher retirement age or higher payroll taxes?
No, I don't. I think that the folks who are at the very top should pay their fair share.
All right, we're in agreement there. So we're now about 5 months into war with Iran. Congressman Craig, how should it end?
Well, I voted to end this war, this illegal and illegitimate war that Trump has pulled us into, I believe, 4 war powers resolutions so far. We've got to get a true ceasefire agreement in place, but that's not going to happen with the rhetoric and the attitude from Pete Hegseth and this administration of just, bombing the hell out of people all the time. They need to sit down and actually force Iran to come to the table. And also, that's not going to happen by giving Iran $300 billion in money and taking the sanctions off of their oil. I believe that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government have really screwed up foreign policy across this country, and that, my biggest hope for the Iran war is that Benjamin Netanyahu loses his election this fall, and Donald Trump needs to get out of this war.
Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, what's your solution to getting out of this war?
Well, I'd say, we have to acknowledge where we're at. There's been $32 billion spent so far. And we recently heard that they're low on munitions. That is incredibly troubling to me, and I think to the American people who now potentially are at risk if there's another crisis. I'd also say, this attitude of essentially taking us into an illegal war at a whim, or simply at the mood of the president is, the Strait of Hormuz is open, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and with a lack of diplomacy, real negotiations. What that has also meant is that 18 servicemen and women have lost their lives, including one Minnesotan. I think this is an example of where it is incredibly important that we take back the House and we take back the Senate.
Are there any circumstances in which you could support more funding for this war?
I think there has to be a plan. Right now, there isn't one. What we know about this war so far is that, they've spent $32 billion and costs for Americans keep going up. So the high price of gas, groceries, Donald Trump is not thinking at all about the American people. His actions have consequences, not just in the Middle East, but right here at home.
What about you?
There's no circumstances I would support more funding for this war, Brian. Donald Trump got us into a war with absolutely no strategic plan whatsoever. It has cost American lives, and this administration doesn't have a strategic plan for getting out of it. And the proposals that they put forward, I believe, would only make the situation in the Middle East even worse. So I'm adamantly opposed to this war in Iran.
You brought up the Israeli prime minister. Do you support halting arms sales to Israel?
Yeah, I think we have to look, a complete look at the security assistance that we provide to the state of Israel in the future. Look, what happened in Gaza, there were way too many civilian lives that were cost. What's happening right now in the West Bank with Israeli settlers is completely inappropriate. The war with Iran is completely inappropriate. And look, I think that the only way we're going to have a reset of foreign policy with Israel at this moment in time is actually looking at the relationship we have with the prime minister. And I don't believe we can recover this relationship with this prime minister. We need a new one.
Arms sales to Israel?
Well, I think it's interesting because you just asked Congresswoman Craig if she supports additional arms sales. She didn't necessarily answer the question. And I think her vote last week speaks for itself. She voted for additional $3.3 billion to be sent to Benjamin Netanyahu and was the only Minnesota Democrat to do so. Congresswoman Craig has a track record of supporting Benjamin Netanyahu and his agenda. She, again, was the only Minnesota Democrat to send 2,000-pound bombs to Netanyahu and has had an incredible amount of support from AIPAC. They've been her biggest funder throughout her entire political career. My values do not align with AIPAC. I'm not taking their money, and I think that this matters when it comes to how we engage in foreign policy. I'm
going to let you respond, but I'm going to tack one on as well. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan has called Israel's actions in Gaza a genocide against Palestinians. Is it?
Look, I don't think that the terminology is helpful to bringing us to a two-state solution. I think that the lieutenant governor brought up the vote from just last week. That was an amendment offered by a Republican to strip all funding, including humanitarian assistance, from the people in Gaza. I actually think we need to fund the rebuilding of Gaza in a very dramatic way. I also think that, as I've said just a moment ago, we have to rethink our strategic foreign policy with the state of Israel. And right now, that with Benjamin Netanyahu, I think that's going to be very difficult to do.
Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, we're going to stay with the Middle East for another minute or so. We learned last week that the Trump administration is exploring a nuclear development deal with Saudi Arabia. Are you on board with that?
I am not on board with that. But if I can just come back to the last question, I think it's important to acknowledge, of course, what happened on October 7th was horrific. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And the response, though, over the last few years, 21,000 children in Gaza have been killed. The UN report that came out at the end of June talks specifically about Palestinian children, infants, being targeted. This is a genocide. I think it's important for us to use that language and to be clear that I think it's a vote to support additional military support to Israel is puts all of us at risk, and I think really misses the moment where Minnesotans are and Americans as a whole. Our taxpayer dollars should not pay for additional weapons, bombs, as the entire communities have been leveled and children and families are suffering.
Representative Craig, can you respond to that? And also the Saudi Arabia question.
No, I don't agree with the president, as you would imagine. But the lieutenant governor is sort of missing the nuance of foreign policy. It is atrocious that Palestinians have died and too many civilians died in the war in Gaza. And of course, October 7th was horrific. But we need to have a conversation about foreign policy with Israel. Without funding for the Iron Dome and many of the defensive measures in Israel, there's a question, does America need to provide that funding? But without it, you would have many, tens of thousands of Israelis who would have died. So I don't think the appropriate time to have this conversation is in an amendment vote. And I would just note that 2 of my 3 Democratic colleagues voted present because they thought this was such a bad bill. One more thing, because the lieutenant governor brought it up briefly. The lieutenant governor is being completely disingenuous about her soliciting support from AIPAC. The Star Tribune covered this. She met with AIPAC. She also provided a position paper to AIPAC. So again, this is Peggy Flanagan, who has been very hypocritical and dishonest.
Peggy Flanagan, 20 seconds on whether you have a relationship with AIPAC.
Sure. I met with AIPAC. I met with J Street. I am endorsed by Ben the Arc. And I think it's important to know that the moment that I said that I would have, supported Bernie Sanders' resolution blocking offensive arms sales to Israel last summer, that was the moment that AIPAC decided that I was a threat. They called me a threat. And to be clear, I stand by that. And they have held over a dozen fundraisers for Congresswoman Craig this cycle. AIPAC is out of step with where Minnesotans are at. And their support for Congresswoman Craig is clear.
We're going to move on to another topic. Money has been undercurrent in this race, and I'm sure we're going to get to it in the next question I have. But you're listening to an NPR News debate between 2 DFLers running for U.S. Senate, Peggy Flanagan and Angie Craig. And there's been no denying that immigration has taken a central role in your primary race after Minnesota became ground zero in the Trump administration crackdown. To Angie Craig, you've voiced regret for voting to grant more immigration detention authority to the Trump administration. What was the reason for your initial support?
Well, my initial support was 3 days into the Trump administration. And when I looked at the bill at the time, we had just allowed Donald Trump, who is an existential threat to this country, to come in part because voters' perception of America's open borders under the previous administration. As this Trump administration attacked our black and brown neighbors, it became absolutely clear that although they weren't using that bill in Operation Metro Surge, that any additional authority to the Trump administration was the wrong decision. And I've said that I regret it. But look,
do you feel like you were deceived, and what was the purpose of it?
Well, look, the bill was a bill that would allow detention of folks who commit crimes. That is not what the Trump administration has done. He said the worst of the worst. And the lieutenant governor, throughout the course of her entire campaign, has sat on the bleachers complaining about the one vote I took in 8 years. Where are her solutions to comprehensive immigration reform in this country? Because where I've been while she's been in the bleachers, at the Whipple Center, standing in front of ICE. Where I've been is introducing articles of impeachment against Kristi Noem. Where I've been is down in Texas trying to get my constituents released from ICE detention and fighting ICE tooth and nail.
Peggy Flanagan, should lawmakers be encouraged or discouraged from changing their mind as new information arises or events arise?
Well, I think the timing of this is what's really important. Mm-hmm. Congresswoman Craig stood by this vote for 14 months during the height of Operation Metro Surge, after Renee Good was killed, after Alex Preddy was killed. She stood by her vote. And here's what I think is important. This wasn't a secret. This didn't sneak up on us. Donald Trump ran on a mass deportation agenda. It was literally in bright signs behind him at rallies in all caps that said mass deportation now. Immigration groups, the ACLU, were, raising red flags all over the place before this vote. And you can talk about standing up to Donald Trump, and, that's one thing, but voting 3 days in to the second Trump administration for Donald Trump's immigration bill that allowed him to terrorize our communities, the loss of life, the economic impact, the trauma, it's horrific. And just shortly thereafter, Congresswoman Craig voted to thank ICE while they were in the streets of Los Angeles, separating families. You ask where I have been? November 16th, 2024, right after the election, I was in a meeting. I was in an organizing meeting with the immigrant community about how we were going to respond. January of 2025, I was in the parish basement of my church determining how we were going to protect our neighbors. That's where I've been.
I want to ask, though, is there a level of immigration enforcement or deportation that's acceptable to you?
Yes. I mean, we absolutely need to make sure that we have secure borders, that we are clear, that there has to be a pathway to citizenship, in particular for DACA recipients who have lived in limbo for so long. But ICE itself has to be ripped apart. We are seeing this essentially lawless entity that has killed 11 people with impunity. It is unacceptable. People are ready for real solutions, but Congresswoman's past support for ICE and for Donald Trump's immigration bill should be disqualifying.
Do you want to respond and also to this idea that some people are raising about abolishing ICE or ripping it apart?
Sure. Well, let me start with, I would invite every listener to read the opinion piece that I wrote in the Star Tribune, because, that came from the heart. I made that decision to accept the accountability of that vote, to tell the people of Minnesota that I do regret that vote. And, I believe in being honest with the people of Minnesota when I make a mistake. I don't see that level of accountability that comes from the lieutenant governor. But the real question is, what do we do now? And what I believe is that we have to dismantle Trump and Republicans' ICE. And that means, number one, we've got to win majorities so that we can actually pass laws to ban those face masks, to make sure that they identify themselves, to put those body cameras on, to stop what's happening in these detention centers, which, by the way, the lieutenant governor raised money from an ICE detention center contractor that is actually building a new detention center right now here in Appleton. So the lieutenant governor, again, is being very disingenuous on this topic. Comprehensive immigration reform, though, Brian, is critically important. I have always supported a path to citizenship for our nation's dreamers. And I also support a path to legal status for undocumented individuals who have been here, obeyed the law, and contributed to
I want to give
country.
Peggy Flanagan a chance to respond to this core civic donation that's come up multiple times this campaign to the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association at the time you were a leader in that organization.
Sure. It's important to note that the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association is a sister committee of the Democratic Party. Its job is to elect Democratic lieutenant governors. That contribution was solicited by staff. I told them to donate it. And my record on Core Civic is that when I was in the Minnesota legislature in 2016, I voted against Core Civic and against opening the private prison in Appleton. Versus Congresswoman Craig, who voted to thank ICE just a year ago. We're not the same.
So reports of the sprawling Feeding Our Future fraud scheme emerged in the first term that you served alongside Governor Tim Walz, and major Medicaid fraud has been exposed since. How much have you been involved in developing a response or defenses to combat future fraud?
Well, I would say this, this is an issue that's come up, and I think it's important, to acknowledge that fraud of any kind is completely unacceptable. Republicans are attacking every Democrat on fraud, from Amy Klobuchar to Keith Ellison to to Congresswoman Craig, just last week there was a Republican ad that came up that had both of us up next to each other, side by side. I think, Congresswoman Craig is maybe naive if she thinks that this is not an issue that's going to
just
come
put
for
a
her
finer
as well.
point on it. Were you part of any discussions when you were discussing how the administration would respond to this emerging crisis?
So the governor's taken the lead here, and the administration has been aggressive internally in working to stop fraud, prevent it from happening in the first place. And I think the measures that have been passed through the legislature, in particular, this independent office of Inspector General, I think is powerful. Keith Ellison, now the Attorney General, has additional resources to be able to go after Medicaid fraud. And Governor Walz has been incredibly aggressive. In fact, turning off, funding for a program, that criminals have accessed. I also think that, Governor Amy Klobuchar, I like her chances, has an aggressive plan in place as well. And the state government is going to have to continue, everyone who is involved, being 2 steps ahead of folks because these criminals are going to become more and more sophisticated.
Angie Craig, has there been sufficient accountability inside the Walz administration for fraud lapses?
The lieutenant governor, even as we sit here today, continues to take absolutely no accountability for any of the fraud issues, and she continues to blame the governor. And I'm going to be honest, it's pissing me off. I mean, I'm proud to have the endorsement of Gwen Walz this morning, but it pisses me off that you completely put all of the responsibility on the governor of Minnesota when you were the number 2 elected leader in Minnesota during that period of time. And you know what? Republicans, they're going to have a field day with this with you. And it is my responsibility to warn Democratic primary voters that Republicans are dying to run against you because they believe that you have a unique vulnerability on fraud. And even as we sit here today, you can't take responsibility. You actually took responsibility on Almanac for the homelessness program in Minnesota. That program itself experienced fraud. So, Lieutenant Governor, I can take accountability for anything I did or should have done differently, but I just, for the life of me, cannot see that you're willing to do the same as a political leader.
So this is simply false. The Congresswoman's accusation around the homelessness program. But I will also say this: I know, what Congressman Craig said just a few weeks ago, that the attacks on Tim Walz and Keith Ellison were political theater. She's now going on to use Republican talking points. And I think that's frankly where Congresswoman Craig is most comfortable as someone who votes with Donald Trump more than any other Minnesota Democrat and has bragged that she votes with Tom Emmer 45% of the time. As a former executive director of a nonprofit organization, the idea that anyone would steal from children, families, the most vulnerable people in our state is abhorrent. And there are measures that this administration has taken. Tim Walz said that he wished more had been done sooner. I think we all feel that way. But I think the approach in the administration in stopping, preventing it from happening in the first place, putting in additional internal controls in the legislation that's passed is important. But in the fall, what we're going to have to do is to take it to Michelle Tafoya. I think it's incredibly important that we talk about why that matters. And it matters because I'm the candidate who is ready. Congresswoman Craig literally votes with Republicans more than any other Minnesota Democrats.
Well, look, Republicans are saying out loud that they would like to run against you. They would not like to run against me. And when you talk about Republicans talking about the fraud issue, they're already running against you on fraud. They're already running against Keith Ellison on fraud. And I can tell you that Donald Trump has $300 million set aside. And Michelle Tafoya is going to pound the lieutenant governor every single day for her role in fraud. At the end of the day, she can't run from the fact that she was the number 2 Democrat in the state of Minnesota, and again today is accepting no accountability for the fraud issues.
10 seconds here. Go ahead.
I just say this. Michelle Tafoya is actively courting Donald Trump support. This is the most corrupt president in the history of the United States, who, frankly, every day something new comes out. $100 million in insider trading, enriching himself to the tune of $1.4 billion in cryptocurrency directly from the White House.
I want to move to healthcare here because it's been clear that you guys think that this administration has gone off the traditional norms and on a lot of fronts. But healthcare is an important topic for a lot of folks. The big, beautiful bill, as the Trump administration, the GOP majorities call it, makes big cuts in Medicaid into the future. What would you propose to help Minnesota address these cuts, given that they're unlikely 60 Senate Democratic votes for much?
Well, we are going to have to win elections and take majorities in order to stop Donald Trump and Republicans. Look, I mean, one of my highest priorities would be to repeal the Medicaid cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. 10 clinics in Minnesota have already been closed. And just to offer as well, we should repeal the cuts to public radio while we're at it. But where I think the solutions to begin to improve the affordability and cost of health care should move into the direction of, and look, this is really personal to me. My family grew up, and at times we needed access to food stamps, and we didn't have access to health insurance. People ought to be able to buy into Medicare, a Medicare choice plan that would allow Medicare for all who want it. That is a next step. And along with that, this bill that I have introduced would extend the ACA tax credits. 17 million people have lost their health care since Donald Trump took office.
Medicaid cuts, I know that your administration is dealing a lot with the fallout. What would you support to right size or fill in the gaps?
Well, I think it's important that we restore the cuts to Medicaid. I'm alive today because of Medicaid. That was how we paid for healthcare when I was a kid. And I have met countless people across the state, including my young friend Bentley, who relies on Medicaid for his healthcare, and his family is deeply concerned about what this means for him and his future. We have to fight to restore those cuts, but I also believe that folks are ready for Medicare for all. We need to ensure that we're not just paying for health insurance, but that people receive actual health care. I talked to a librarian in Canby who told me that her deductible is $16,000 a year. And she paid $600 for a 5-minute med check. That is untenable. And I wish, Brian, that I could tell you that story was unique. It is not. And this is another place, I think, a point of difference. Health insurance companies have made considerable donations to Congresswoman Craig. She does not support Medicare for all, and I do.
You've used the phrase Medicare for all who want it.
Right.
You've stopped short of the full approach to Medicare for all. Something you support a competing public option plan. Why is that the way to go?
Well, look, I think the Lieutenant Governor and I both agree that we need universal health care in this country. What we don't agree on is how to get there. And again, one more disingenuous attack from the Lieutenant Governor, because a Medicare for all who want it plan would actually provide direct competition with health insurance companies in our country. One of the reasons why, and I'm not sure if the Lieutenant Governor understands this, but one of the reasons why I am concerned about moving forward with Medicare for all would be that we live in a healthcare system today that rewards volume. Physicians get paid on the number of procedures they perform. Hospitals get paid on the number of procedures they perform. It actually rewards disease in this country. We have to move to an outcomes-based, values-based system where our healthcare system is based on actually achieving health. Look, I worked in healthcare for 22 years. I helped lead and actually had to make decisions about covering my own employees in a self-insured healthcare plan. We didn't go with a health insurance company. The cost of specialty drugs, compound drugs is out of control in this nation, and that's why I've been such an active supporter of taking on Big Pharma to lower healthcare costs. And by the way, Big Pharma is supporting the super PAC, supporting the Lieutenant Governor.
In the realm of those lower down the economic ladder, the federal minimum wage has been at $7.25 since 2009. What should it be?
A minimum of $15, and it probably should be higher than that right now. People should not have to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to make a living wage in this country. Look, and I would say that this is one of the things that I'm worried about us as a nation. People have lost confidence in elected leaders in this country because they come in, they promise the world, and they achieve nothing. I have actually passed 13 bills since I've been a member of Congress in my short 7+ years in politics. It should be much, much higher.
Lieutenant Governor, what should the federal minimum wage be?
Well, I think it should be at least $20 indexed to inflation. And this is something that I care about a lot. And frankly, I've got a track record here when it comes to increasing the minimum wage. I was the co-chair of the campaign to raise the wage in Minnesota when I was the executive director of Children's Defense Fund. At the time, we were told that we were being too ambitious and asking for too much, but we stood our ground. I knew, we all knew that the cost of living was going to continue to go up, and we knew that our wages had to catch up and keep up. And so now every year for the last decade or so, we've seen an increase in the minimum wage, and over 400,000 people have benefited from that. In Washington, they haven't raised the minimum wage in over 16 years. I think it's important to bring that fight, and I think people are absolutely ready for it.
Would you roll back any of the tax cuts in that federal bill passed last year, the big, beautiful bill?
Absolutely.
Which
the
ones?
Tax breaks for the top 1%. For the folks at the very, very top, the fact that our corporations are not taxed, it's outrageous. And this has been, the entire Trump administration has been about him catering to himself, to the billionaires who surround him at the expense of everyone else. Cuts to Medicaid, cuts to SNAP, literally taking food off of the table, ripping healthcare away from people to simply pay for tax cuts for people who do not need them.
Angie Craig, which tax cuts would you consider rolling back?
Well, I would repeal nearly the entirety of the One Big Beautiful Bill. There were some small business tax cuts in there that on a standalone basis I could certainly support. But the wealth inequality gap in our nation is literally what is ripping this country apart.
Who qualifies as wealthy?
Well, look, that depends on the eye of the beholder, right? But, anyone who is fortunate enough to make, 6 figures in this country, I think is, someone who lives in the middle class in this country. And we need to prioritize our tax policies for the middle and working class in this country again. The corporate tax breaks that were extended as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill were atrocious. And remember what it was all for, right? The One Big Beautiful Bill, the $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, the $187 billion in cuts to SNAP. It was also the top income earners in this country could get a tax break.
You're listening to an NPR News debate between two DFLers running for U.S. Senate. That was Angie Craig, and Peggy Flanagan is with us too. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want you to briefly, emphasis on the briefly, say why your personal and professional experience makes you best suited for this office. Angie Craig, you go first. A minute or two would be great.
Yeah. So, look, I grew up in a mobile home park. We moved a lot. My mom was a single mom who went to college at night, one class at a time, for 9 years to become a public school teacher in this country. My wife was a public school teacher as well. She and I have raised together 4 tremendous boys who are now young men. We had to fight for the right to marry and become a family in this country. I believe my life experience of fighting for Minnesotans, particularly in the marriage equality battle here. The other thing to note is I stepped off the sidelines in 2016 when Trump came onto the scene in American politics to run in a district that had been in Republican hands for 3/4 of a century. No one thought any Democrat could win that seat. No one certainly thought a lesbian mother of 4 could win that seat. But not only have we won it, we have held it. And in the last election cycle, in my district that leans Democrat by 3 percentage points, I won by 14 percentage points. So I believe that life experience, my experience of actually having to run a health plan for 16,000 Minnesotans makes me especially
Thank you.
qualified.
Peggy Flanagan.
Sure. So, I'm a kid who grew up on the margins. We relied on SNAP, Section 8, paid the rent, and I'm alive because of Medicaid. I also watched my mom work incredibly hard. She got her certificate in phlebotomy from St. Kate's, and we often would tease her about being a professional vampire. And I remember when she walked across the stage when I was 7 years old in her blue cap and gown, it felt like I was walking across that stage. I know what it's like to try to stretch $20 through the end of the month. And I have spent my entire career fighting for economic security for Minnesota families, from leading the Children's Defense Fund to increasing the minimum wage, being one of the co-founders of Minnesotans for Paid Family and Medical Leave. When my daughter Siobhan was still an infant on my hip, we got that done as well. And I'd say the bottom line is that this campaign is about the many versus the money. I don't take a dime of corporate PAC money, and will be beholden only to Minnesotans and no one else.
So endorsements have become a big feature of this race. Did you ask Governor Tim Walz to endorse you?
Listen, the governor was really clear very early on that he was going to stay neutral, and
So
I
did you
appreciate that. That's his position. I am encouraged that I have support from folks all across the country. And, listen, I'm proud of the work that Governor Walz and I have been able to do together. But I think that, this race has been important for me to step out into the Peggy Flanagan for U.S. Senate campaign. And that's what I've tried to do.
Angie Craig, you've already mentioned that Gwen Walz endorsement, but did you ask the governor for his endorsement?
Look, the governor said he would stay out of this race at this moment in time. Certainly, I'm so grateful to the First Lady of Minnesota, Gwen Walz, for her strong endorsement in this race. And look, I have 7 U.S. senators who've endorsed me, but I don't highlight those. What I highlight are the local elected officials, because this race isn't about national politics. It's about local people. It's about Jacob Fry's endorsement. It's about Kali Hur. It's about the mayors and county commissioners who have endorsed me. So, I think the lieutenant governor, it really speaks for itself, honestly, that the lieutenant governor worked with the governor for the last 8 years, and he has declined to endorse personally in this race. It's probably a very, I'll say it's interesting in the most Minnesota sense.
You'll get a chance to respond in a second, but Angie Craig, did you ask an emissary to ask State Senator John Hoffman for his backing while he was recovering in the hospital from his shooting in June 2025?
I did not. I would never, and no one would ever ask Senator Hoffman for his support while he was recovering in the ICU. Look, my heart goes out to John and Yvette and Hope. I can't imagine what he and his family have gone through. But this is something that speaks directly to my personal integrity, that this comment at Peggy's rally, and the individual that John Hoffman called a good friend is quoted in a Star Tribune article this morning saying
David Wellstone.
That did not happen. Yes, David Wellstone is the friend. Look, I don't know what Senator Hoffman went through when he was in the ICU, but what I can tell you is that I would never, ever do that. And nor would David Wellstone ever go to the ICU on anyone's behalf and talk about politics while John Hoffman lay there. That speaks to Dave's personal integrity as well.
Peggy Flanagan, what do you want to say about what she said about you and your relationship with the governor and or this latest endorsement issue?
Well, I'd just say, I adore John Hoffman and Yvette and Hope, and I am so glad that they're alive. And that, this conversation is absolutely between Congresswoman Craig and the Hoffmans. I don't have much else to say about that. I'd say with regards to, to the governor again, he was clear early on that he would stay out. I'm actually not surprised that, Gwen Walz has endorsed Congresswoman Craig. They've been good friends. She gave me a heads up. That's fine. I get it. But I also think it's, telling that the folks who have endorsed in this race, Ilhan Omar, Betty McCollum, Senator Tina Smith, and Amy Klobuchar has indicated that she's going to, vote for the DFL ticket, that those are folks who also work very closely with Congresswoman Craig. I'm also incredibly proud to have the endorsement of the DFL party, of several senators, but also the majority of, DFL elected officials serving in the legislature. And I'm proud of the campaign that we have built by going to every corner of the state. We've got incredible momentum, and I'm excited for August 11th.
Very briefly.
Yeah, so I would just note to your listeners that I have the support of almost every single elected leader across the state who is running in a competitive race. They believe that the vulnerabilities on fraud, as well as, frankly, the lieutenant governor's performance and as lieutenant governor on her actual required responsibilities, like the homelessness committee, like the Capitol Security Committee. Look, I don't know why, but over the course of 8 years, you didn't call 45% of the meetings that were required under state law. And I would ask you here today, if your office would make public how many days you've actually been in the lieutenant governor's office at the Capitol while you have been running for the U.S. Senate. I've made 99% of my votes in Washington.
Care to respond?
I would just say this. I am proud of the work that we did in a bipartisan way and the Advisory Committee on Capital Area Security. Minnesota was an outlier for a very long time when it came to metal detectors at the state capitol. There were 33 states, who had them previously. We made that recommendation. We got it across the finish line. There's been additional support for cameras, secure doors, and I would also just say this: the work, and as the chair of the Interagency Council on Homelessness, veterans homelessness is down by 41%. We have done tremendous work. 100,000 folks have been able to secure homes or stay in their homes or purchase a new home. And the thing I am most proud of in that work is that we brought in individuals with lived experience who have experienced homelessness, who are advising our state agencies. It has revolutionized the way that we've done the work.
Time is escaping us, and I do want to make sure to get to a big role of the U.S. Senate, and that's confirmation of Supreme Court and other judicial appointees. The Supreme Court has moved quite far to the conservative end and has upended a lot of laws that have been passed in the states and other areas. Should there be age limits or service limits on members of the Supreme Court?
I think it's incredibly important that we reform the Supreme Court. I believe that Ending Citizens United is foundational to ensuring that we continue to have a democracy. That means that we need to expand the court. I think we should look at term limits, but it should all be on the table.
Supreme Court, Angie Craig.
Look, I think we should have term limits. I think we should look at expanding the court. And look, I will go on the record today saying I will not vote for one judicial nominee that this Trump administration puts forth as a U.S. Senator. Citizens United and campaign finance reform is absolutely critical, and so is ending gerrymandering in our nation if we actually want to fix some of the systemic issues that our country has.
I know that you guys are going to be at an agriculture-focused forum next week, so I left some of those to the Farm Fest folks. But I do want to ask about climate and wildfires. Fire crews that are currently battling the fires in the Boundary Waters Canoe area predict it'll be a lengthy fire season. How should federal lawmakers be confronting these intensifying conditions for fires here and elsewhere in recent years?
Well, look, we just had a hearing on this last week in the House Ag Committee, and I took the chief to task over the fact that they have cut almost 15% of the Forest Service resources since they have been in office. They have literally failed to complete grant money that was due so that we could do burns to prevent wildfires in our country. And so, look, it's just devastating to me what's happening in the boundary waters. And the Trump administration has got to be held accountable for this, and they've got to be held accountable for many other things. And that's why I'm holding them accountable.
I would say, we know that climate change is real. We are seeing it in real time here. I am grateful to the National Guard and to the first responders who've been in the boundary waters trying to get these fires under control. This is a place where we need to be incredibly aggressive. We have moved backwards under the Trump administration, we need to focus on a clean energy economy. People are ready for that. And I think that, one of the reasons that we're in this position has been the fossil fuel industry. This is another place, Chevron has contributed to Congresswoman Craig. She voted 11 times to drill on public lands. We've got clear difference in our positions here. And I believe we should fight climate change, not take funds from the people.
We're going to get to closing statements in just a minute here, but just real quick, campaigns can get abrasive, as this one sure has. Only one of you will prevail on August 11th. Will you make a unity call and campaign for the winner if you don't prevail? Peggy Flanagan.
Of course.
I absolutely will support the lieutenant governor. We have an existential crisis in our nation with Trump and Republicans. And so I would be right by the lieutenant governor's side, asking my supporters to support her. The most important thing in this election is that we beat Republicans. That's what matters.
All right. Before we got going, we flipped a coin to decide who could have a couple-minute closing first and who would go last. And Angie Craig, you'll go first.
Well, I'll start where I ended just then. This is an existential moment in time. The only way we stop Donald Trump and Republicans is by winning elections. I am in the best position to win this statewide election. I'm so proud to have Gwen Walls' endorsement, and that was her message this morning. I go everywhere. I talk to everyone. In my own district, I outperformed the top of the ticket by 8 percentage points in my last election. I like Peggy. We have been friends over the years from a political perspective, but the lieutenant governor has a specific vulnerability on fraud that Amy Klobuchar and I, at the top of the DFL ticket in 2026, do not have. At the end of the day, no one is coming to save us. Voters have to use their democracy in order to save democracy. I still believe in this country. We have to fight Trump. I know how to do that, but we also have to be able to reach across the aisle to get things done. And as an experienced leader ready to go on day one in the U.S. Senate, that is exactly what I will do, and I would be honored to have
Peggy
your
Flanagan,
support.
you get the last 95 seconds.
Thank you. Well, Minnesota, I am so grateful for this conversation. I've heard from you all across the state of Minnesota that you're sick and tired of nibbling around the edges and you are ready for big, bold change. Part of the reason that we're here is because too many Democrats have been weak. Congresswoman Craig has a track record of voting with Donald Trump more than any other Minnesota Democrat, and until she decided to run for the U.S. Senate, bragged on her website that she voted with Tom Emmer 45% of the time. She voted for Donald Trump's immigration bill that unleashed ICE onto our communities and continues to try to, change her record. You know who got Kristi Noem fired? The people of Minnesota. You did that. And here's what I know. I will never bend to Donald Trump. I will always stand with Minnesotans. And with the corporate PAC money that is coming into this race, the dark money, over $17 million so far, you have to ask yourself, who does Congresswoman Craig stand with? I stand with the people of Minnesota. I will be beholden only to you. I've delivered on minimum wage, paid family and medical leave, feeding kids breakfast and lunch in school, and will continue to fight for a country, for a state where everyone has an opportunity so that Minnesotans can afford the lives they want to live. There's lots of room on Team Peggy. I am the DFL endorsed candidate in this race. I have support from Tina Smith, who currently holds a seat. I'd be honored to earn your support on or before August 11th. Thank you so much.
And that is all the time we have. And just as a reminder, August 11th is that primary day. Thank you to Peggy Flanagan and Angie Craig for joining us. They're both DFLers vying for the party's U.S. Senate nomination. This debate was produced by Matt Alvarez and Jeff Jones, with a lot of folks from the NPR News events and technical teams chipping in. You can find a video version of this debate on nprnews.org and find our handy voter guide there too for races up and down the ballot. Again, remember that primary is on August 11th. That's 2 weeks from this Tuesday. We thank you for tuning in, but do stick around because there's going to be some debate analysis right up next with Nina Moyni and the Minnesota Now crew. So there's going to be a lot to say about what you just heard. I'm Brian Bakst. Thank you for listening.